It didn't begin with temptation. It began with absence. Not the kind you notice in headlines or heartbreak songs, but the kind that slowly erodes you from the inside out. A soft, creeping silence that makes its home in your bones until one day, you forget what warmth ever felt like. My marriage wasn't broken, not in the ways people measure. He came home. He paid bills, he remembered birthdays. He was fine. But fine is a slow kind of dying. Fine is what you say when nothing's burning. But nothing's alive either. I used to stare at him across the dinner table, watching his mouth move as he talked about quarterly earnings, and wonder, when did we stop asking how each other's day went and start rehearsing answers? Then my nephew came to stay. Just for the summer, for an internship, family. I hadn't seen him in years. Last time he was a lanky teenager. Now he was a man. And I hated how I noticed that. He walked in with a duffel bag and a crooked grin. Eyes tired but warm. He hugged me like I mattered. Not like I was just someone married into the family. And suddenly, I remembered what it felt like to be seen, not looked at, not assessed, but noticed. He didn't flirt, didn't cross any lines, he just listened, laughed at my sarcasm, helped with dishes, made me tea like it was second nature. I called it harmless. Because what else could I call it? But late at night, while my husband turned his back to sleep, I found myself remembering the way my nephew's hand brushed mine when he passed the sugar bowl. It's funny how the smallest touch can feel louder than anything else in your life. Then one night, I mentioned my back ached. Casually, like people do when they want to be noticed but don't want to admit it. He looked up. Sincere. Want me to try something? I've learned a little massage. It might help. And I could have laughed. Should've, but I didn't. Because the truth was, I hadn't been touched with care in years. Not really. So I nodded. And when he pressed his hands to my shoulders, gentle, respectful, my skin remembered something my heart had forgotten. What tenderness felt like. And that, right there, was the beginning of the end. Not of my marriage. Not yet, but of my denial. I started brushing my hair before breakfast, putting on lipstick I hadn't worn since 2014, telling myself it was routine, but it wasn't. He noticed. He always noticed. A new clip in my hair. A laugh I didn't mean to let slip. The way I bit my lip when I was thinking. He noticed, and I let him. Then my husband left for a work trip. 3 days. I should have felt freedom. Instead, I felt seen. My nephew cooked, poured wine, listened, and when he touched my back again it wasn't clinical anymore, it was reverent. Unspoken. Still no lines crossed, but God, they were vibrating. When he whispered, "You deserve to be taken care of," something inside me shattered. And the worst part, it didn't feel wrong. It felt like breathing after holding it for years. That night, in the hallway, he stopped. Said, "I hope I didn't cross a line." And I should have said yes. Should have created space. Should have remembered what it meant to be a wife. But instead, I said, "It felt nice." And we both knew what I meant. It didn't take much after that. A glance too long, a pause too quiet. When he kissed me, it wasn't lust, it was history. Buried, hushed, denied. But alive. Every part of me answered back. Because for once, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't an obligation. I wasn't a routine. I was wanted. And it wasn't about sex. It was about being held like I mattered. Like I was worth softness, worth stillness, worth staying for. Afterwards we didn't speak. Not right away. He held me like he'd been holding that moment inside him for years. And when the sun rose, the guilt was there. But it was quieter than the ache I'd carried before. He said, "I didn't do it because I wanted something casual. I did it because I meant every second." And then, he broke me open. "I've loved you since I was 16. I froze. Because suddenly, this wasn't about a lonely summer night. This was about years of silence and someone who had been watching, not in lust, but in longing. He saw the cracks I'd painted over. The pretending, the trying. The strength that wasn't strength, just silence. And then I told him to leave. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because I felt too much. He asked me one question. "Do you regret it, or are you just scared of what it means?" And I still don't have the answer. But I know this. He left without slamming doors. Without asking for promises. Just with a look that said everything I wasn't brave enough to. Now I lie next to a man who never asks why I flinch when he touches me by accident. He sleeps soundly, while I lie awake replaying a voice I'll never forget. "I've loved you since I was 16. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Not that I cheated, but that for the first time in years, someone looked at me and didn't just see a wife, they saw me. The day after he left, I folded his sheets like I was sealing a secret, washed the pillowcase twice, lit a candle I didn't even like, just to make the room smell like anything other than him. But the thing about ghosts is, they don't live in rooms. They live in memory, in breath, in the way your skin remembers a touch it shouldn't have welcomed. And he was everywhere. The chair he used to sit in with his morning coffee, the dent his backpack left by the front door, the way I almost said his name when calling someone else's. My husband came home 2 days later, dropped his luggage with a sigh, kissed me on the cheek like always, routine, safe, silent. I asked him how the conference went. He gave me bullet points, names I didn't recognize, a joke I didn't laugh at. I watched his mouth move, but I wasn't listening. Because I already knew he didn't notice anything. Not the stillness in me, not the storm I was swallowing, not the ache that had taken up residence in my chest like it paid rent. That night he fell asleep fast. Just like always, I lay beside him, still. Every part of me was cold except the one place I still felt him. Not my nephew, not anymore, the man. The man who said he loved me since he was 16. The man who touched me like I was glass, and not someone long forgotten. I stared at the ceiling, trying to pretend I didn't feel empty in all the places he had filled. The next morning I told myself to be better, to try, to return to what I had. I made breakfast, put on music, wore a dress I knew my husband liked even though I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. He complimented me, but it felt like an echo of someone else's voice, flatter, farther, forced. Because once you've heard, "I've loved you since I was 16, whispered like a confession and not a seduction, everything else sounds scripted. I wanted to tell him, I did, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because the lie between us was growing teeth. Instead I stayed silent, bit my lip, swallowed the truth like a pill too large to choke down. But silence has a weight, and it was crushing me. A week later, I found a note tucked into the book I had lent him, forgotten, or maybe left on purpose. It just said, "You taught me what love felt like, even if it was never mine to have." No name, no signature, just truth. I stared at it for an hour, held it like a wound, folded it up and hid it in the box where I kept things I wasn't proud of. Old letters, photos I couldn't throw away, pieces of a woman I once was. My husband noticed I was distant, asked me if I was feeling okay. I wanted to scream, to tell him I wasn't okay, that I hadn't been okay in years, that someone else had noticed that and he hadn't. Instead, I said, "Just tired." He nodded, went back to his laptop. That was the end of it. But it wasn't the end of me. Because the worst thing isn't being betrayed. It's realizing you were already gone before anyone touched you. I think I loved him too, in my own quiet, broken way. Not in a way that was fair. Not in a way I could explain. But in the way people love when they're dying of thirst and someone hands them water. It was survival, not sin. Not at first. Now I spend my days pretending, and nights remembering. I see him sometimes, in people who smile the way he did, in the way someone holds a wine glass, in the color of a sky just before a storm. He's gone, but my body still flinches when I hear footsteps at the door, just in case it's him. It never is. And my husband still sleeps beside me, unaware, unmoved, untouched. The part that hurts most, I don't hate him for it. I just don't feel anything at all. It had been 3 months, 3 seasons of pretending, 3 months of dinner conversations that never went deeper than, "How was your day?" 3 months of quiet grief, over something no one had died from, but still managed to leave me mourning. I thought I could forget, convince myself it was a moment, not a shift, not a truth I'd never heard said out loud before. But forgetting doesn't happen in silence. It happens in fragments. In the way I'd pause, mid-sentence, when I caught the scent of his cologne on someone else. In how I avoided the guest room like it was a haunted place. In how my body tensed every time my phone buzzed, hoping, then hating myself for hoping. Then one afternoon, he came back. I didn't know he would, didn't expect it. I opened the door thinking it was a delivery, and there he was, same crooked smile, same quiet eyes, like no time had passed, like everything had. My heart did that thing where it skips a beat, not because it's romantic, but because it's terrified of what it still remembers. He said he forgot his jacket, left it in the closet upstairs. didn't want to bother me. But we both knew. That jacket was just an excuse to stand in the doorway again, to feel the weight of the silence between us one more time. I let him in. I shouldn't have. But I did. He walked like he didn't know where to look. I stood like I didn't know what to say. And in that pause, that heavy, aching pause, the air between us said everything our mouths couldn't. He looked older somehow, like life had pressed its thumb a little deeper into him. But when he looked at me, God, it was the same. That quiet knowing, that soft ache, that unspoken truth that had never really left the room. He said, I wasn't going to come. But I couldn't leave it like that. I swallowed hard, felt the sting behind my eyes, said nothing. I just needed you to know, he continued, that it wasn't a mistake. Not for me. I looked down, at my hands, my wedding ring. The skin beneath it that suddenly felt tight, like it didn't belong to me anymore. You should go, I whispered. Because anything louder might break me. He nodded, but before he turned, he said the thing I wasn't ready for. If you ever need more than silence, you know where to find me. Then he was gone, again, like he never existed. But God, I could still feel him in the places no one else ever touched. That night, I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes that didn't need washing, trying to scrub away the ache. My husband walked in, said nothing at first, just watched me. Then, for the first time in what felt like years, he asked, Are you happy? I dropped a plate. It didn't shatter. But I did. I looked up at him, tried to lie, but the words caught in my throat. What kind of question is that? I finally said, too soft. He looked at me differently this time, not suspicious, not jealous, just distant. Like he was staring at someone he used to know and couldn't quite recognize. You've been somewhere else lately, he said. I thought maybe I was imagining it. I didn't deny it. Didn't have the energy. He sighed, ran a hand through his hair, sat down at the table and stared at his hands. Did I lose you and just not notice when it happened? And that was the moment I knew this wasn't about cheating. It was about absence, neglect, loneliness that neither of us had named until someone else did. I sat down across from him, still didn't answer, but tears welled anyway. I don't know how to reach you, he said. And I whispered, I'm not sure I know how to be reached anymore. There was silence. But this one wasn't empty. It was full of everything we'd never said, of everything we'd chosen to survive instead of feel. We didn't fight, didn't touch, didn't make any promises, just sat there. Two people who used to be in love wondering when exactly they stopped, and across town, in a small apartment. I knew there was someone who had never stopped seeing me. Even when he shouldn't have. I didn't make a decision that night. There was no dramatic goodbye. No bags packed in silence, no last kiss at the doorway. I just went to bed, and lay next to a man I'd built a life with, but not a connection. He didn't reach for me, and I didn't turn toward him. We just breathed in opposite directions, like we always did. The next morning, I got up before him, sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I couldn't taste. I thought about the note he left in the book. I'd read it again the night before. And again, and again. I kept hoping the words would fade if I stared long enough, but they didn't. You taught me what love felt like, even if it was never mine to have. That sentence lived under my skin now, and the truth is, he had already taken nothing from me that I hadn't long since lost. It wasn't about betrayal. It was about memory. About being seen before I even knew I'd disappeared. Later that afternoon, I went to the guest room. I hadn't opened it since he left. It smelled like dust and restraint. I stood there for a long time, my hand resting on the bedpost like if I held it long enough, some answer would come. It didn't. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, and whispered something I hadn't said aloud to anyone. I don't want to be this version of me anymore. Not the dutiful wife. Not the silent woman. Not the shadow. I wanted more. Not more excitement. Not more passion, just more truth. I walked into our bedroom. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, tying his shoes. I sat beside him, close but not touching. I need to say something, I said. He didn't speak. Just waited. I haven't felt like myself in a long time, I began, and I think we've both known it, but neither of us wanted to name it. He looked over at me, slow, cautious. That look you give someone when you know what's coming might hurt, but you respect them enough to hear it anyway. I'm not blaming you, I said. Not entirely. We both built something that looked solid, but hollowed out in places we didn't tend to. Still, he said nothing. And maybe that's what broke me more than anything. Even now, when I was handing him the most fragile part of me, he didn't ask why, didn't ask when, didn't ask with who. Just waited for it to pass, like he always did, and I realized he would let me die next to him in silence if it meant avoiding a confrontation. I've made mistakes, I said. I crossed a line. I let something happen that shouldn't have. His head lowered, but he didn't ask questions. Not even one. It was a kind of mercy, or maybe cowardice. I still don't know. He just said, "Are you leaving?" I took a breath that felt centuries long. No, not yet. But I need time, space, honesty. I don't want to pretend anymore. He nodded once, and I think part of him was relieved. Not because I stayed, but because he didn't have to decide. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I lay in the guest room. The room where everything changed. The room where I remembered what it felt like to be held like I mattered. And still I didn't text him, didn't call. Because what we shared wasn't just about want, it was about timing, need, loneliness so deep it made anything that felt like love look like salvation. I needed to know who I was without being someone's wife or someone's secret. I needed to be whole before I chose anything again. Weeks passed, we lived in the same house but something was different. Not broken, not bitter, just quiet. The kind of quiet that grows when people stop lying, but don't quite know how to tell the truth yet. And one morning, I woke up and made a choice. I didn't pack a suitcase. I didn't leave a note. I just took my keys and drove. Not to him, not yet. To the woman I used to be, before silence, before obligation, before the ache of being unseen made me forget my name. I don't know what's next, but I know this love that requires you to erase yourself isn't love. It's duty, it's fear, it's survival, and I'm finally ready to stop surviving.